Although we will celebrate the Feast of the Epiphany tomorrow, that is the arrival of the Magi at the manger, we step ahead in time today on this, the second Sunday of Christmas, and remember their departure from that scene. After they have left, Joseph is warned in a dream that there are those who would kill Jesus if they had the opportunity. And so under the cover of darkness, Joseph gathers the family and he flees stealthily into the land of Egypt. Egypt, which had long been a place of refuge for Jewish folks. A question might arise, but I thought that was the land out of which they had to be set free when Moses said, "Let my people go." Yes, but remember before that, Jacob went to Egypt for refuge when he and his family were starving. That's where they went and found help. And so it had long been a place of refuge as well. Egypt also was ruled by the Romans, and so then the question might arise, why would Jesus flee to a place also under Roman control? But it wasn't the Romans who were the problem for Jesus right away. It was Herod, this puppet king of Judea, of the kingdom of Israel, of that area. That was the real problem, not the Romans in particular, because remember, Herod claimed for himself the title of King of the Jews. And Jesus at his birth was declared to be King of Kings and King of the Jews. This was not a title that Herod was willing to share. And so he told the Magi to return to him after they had found this child so that he could go and wink, wink, nudge, nudge, worship the child as well. And when he realizes that he isn't going to have this chance to go and worship this child, that the Magi have outwitted him because they've been warned not to go back to him in a dream, in order to take care of the problem, to eliminate the risk of this child Jesus growing to adulthood, he calls for a strike that is known to us today as the murder of the innocents, and he deals a crushing blow to the tiny community of Bethlehem, luckily from which Jesus has already fled. It's a bit of biblical narrative that we don't have outside historical verification for, but we do know from outside sources that Herod killed at least 2 of his own sons, and so you know he had it in him. Marcus Borg reminds us in his book, The First Christmas, that from the very outset, the clash between the world's system of domination and death stands in opposition to this new way of life and peace promised in the baby Jesus. So Joseph, Mary, and Jesus are forced into the life of refugees, strangers in a strange land. Look at the cover of your bulletin for a moment. On the cover of the bulletin, you'll see an image from Egypt. I picked it up at a church in Cairo this past May. It's traditional Coptic-style icon. You know, all icons come from Egypt originally. And so this is the traditional Coptic. Coptic is the native Christian sort and variety there. And you see the Holy Family in Egypt riding a felucca, that sailing ship that's still used to this day, all up and down the Nile, tiny ones and big ones alike. Our pilgrims rode on one. And that constant donkey always in accompaniment, the one that she would ride sometimes, the one that reminds us that this rebirth of humanity in Jesus is not just for humanity, but for all of creation. And in the background, just so that you're sure where we are, the pyramids of Giza. All right, now close your bulletin and stop looking. Those pilgrims who traveled with me to Egypt this past year will remember the church where I bought that image that's up in my office, framed. It's a church in Cairo, and it's a place where for millennia people have remembered the Holy Family resting on their sojourn in Egypt. There's this cave underneath the church, and that's the spot where they remember the Holy Family living for some amount of time. Actually, there's a whole series of churches all throughout Egypt that remember this same journey. There's a real pride among the native Egyptian Christians that theirs was the only land outside of Palestine that was ever visited by Jesus during his earthly life. And as we stood in that cave below this magnificent church in Cairo, I noticed a little nook carved out of the side of the cave, and I gathered some of the pilgrims up close as we were all sort of hushed in this space, and I whispered in the ear of a couple of them, "That's the holy nook. That's where Jesus kept his Legos." As a father of 3 boys, Legos are a major part of my life. They are literally everywhere I step. So when I saw Jesus' childhood home, I thought, Legos. It was a facetious comment, for sure. One, and my mother would have said, "Stop being facetious." One made rather inappropriately in an overtly holy place, but one that hinted at a still more profound truth. Because we are talking about real people in the story of the flight into Egypt. Surely Jesus did have little toys. And surely they did have to be stored somewhere in the places where they stayed. Real people in real danger, fleeing for their lives from a true megalomaniac who felt threatened by their very existence. What does it mean then for us Christians that we follow a man who in his earliest days had lived a life in which he wasn't wanted, was freed to flee for his life by a system of domination and of death? With all the grandeur that surrounds us, like that brief moment at the crib when Jesus was surrounded with gold and frankincense and myrrh, we might be tempted to lose sight of what we're all about. With all our fancy buildings and our outfits, with our respectable and decent music, no offense, Charles and choir, with our dignified and glorious liturgies, with our relatively full church bank accounts, with our full stomachs and places to lay our heads, with our clothes on our backs and the shoes on our feet, and with all that we enjoy, we might forget that we follow a man who from his earliest days wasn't wanted and was forced to flee for his life into a strange place. The church in Southern California has for several years now displayed its nativity scene out in the front yard of the church, but instead of just the regular figures arranged normally in theirs, each figure is in its own cage, meant to be reminiscent of the holding facilities along the Mexico-United States border. Provocative? Certainly. But realistic? Surely. In order to more fully appreciate the plight of the Holy Family, we need only look to any of the myriad refugee crises around the world today: Venezuela, Afghanistan, Syria, the Congo. Many years ago now, Howard Thurman wrote, "I seek a gracious spirit in dealing with the injustices of the world. This I do not confuse with softness or fear or cowardice or sentimentality. I must know clearly the evilness of evil and recognize it for what it is: stark, brutal, terrifying. I must oppose it, place the full weight of whatever forces I have thoroughly against it. At the same time, I cannot escape the fact that every judgment is a self-judgment. that even as I resist evil, I share the guilt of evil. It is this sense of sharing the guilt of evil that it should inspire the gracious spirit in dealing with injustice. It is out of the depths of my own imperfection that I dare seek the gracious spirit, and I wait in the presence of God this day. What does it mean for us Christians, who are now the ones in power, at least in this country, to consider that our Lord never knew what it was like to be in charge? What does it mean for Christians in the 21st century to be in the places of influence? What does it mean for us, who were once the outcasts and the unwanted and the refugees, to be the ones deciding who are the new outcasts and the new unwanted ones and the new refugees? As powerful Christians, itself an oxymoron of a phrase, we are called to recognize the evilness of evil and to name it for what it is, and then to throw the full weight of whatever forces we have thoroughly against it. Complacency or inaction, as has been famously said, are nothing but collusion with wrong. Will we be Herod's friends or Jesus' friends? We cannot be both. It's the particular choice of Christians today just as much as it was the choice of those Egyptians who took in that refugee family from Bethlehem.